So we've had a little time to digest the hybrid schedule and are, for the moment, on track to open at least partially in person. We know the meeting days of the schedule, and we know that we will be using Microsoft Teams at the secondary level. What remains is to devise an effective, efficient, and sustainable workflow to provide a coherent learning experience for our students. I believe careful thought now can avoid unnecessary challenges later. As I try to relax and enjoy some summertime with my children, I can't stop thinking about the details. Based on my experiences with Microsoft Teams in the spring, my experimentations this summer, and 2 decades of tinkering with Microsoft products and VBA programming, I'd like to get into some of the nuts and bolts about how I will be setting up my courses in Microsoft Teams. There's a lot to unpack here, but I hope my skeleton for the year provides something less abstract to think about as you approach your teaching during this very different year. I'll link a transcript below. In my previous video, link in the description, I laid out a rationale for including all group period cohorts of a course in the same Microsoft team, though there are valid reasons for a different approach. Goals. My goal is to create a framework that is, first of all, sustainable by the teacher, that provides a consistent, manageable experience for the student, that provides meaningful feedback for the students without excessive burden. I want something that promotes active student engagement through synchronous and asynchronous peer interaction, that allows the teacher to provide small group feedback with as little overhead as possible, and that has flexibility to adapt to any changes. Setting up the team. Keep the number of channels to a minimum. Students have expressed that they don't like having many channels. It gets confusing. I want to have a general channel for whole course discussions and for students to help each other, kind of like a study group. I want a channel for each group period cohort mirroring the hybrid schedule, and I want to keep those channels actually public for reasons I explained in my previous video. I also think it might be worth having a conference channel. By that I mean a channel where I will schedule meetings to meet with students individually. Though it's a public channel, I will use the lobby feature to admit students. Additional channels might be used sparingly. I mentioned this last time, but I have a planning spreadsheet, and I think I'll create a separate video to be linked eventually below on the modified hybrid planning schedule that I've developed. But based on feedback, I've modified it since my initial thoughts. The most up-to-date version of this file can always be downloaded at www.mrhosey.com/planner. Up to 6 different meeting groups can be defined. For my course, this will be Group 1 on Mondays and Thursdays, and Group 2 on Tuesdays and Fridays. To change the meeting days, simply change the meeting days of the week in F3 to K3. Entering A or B specifies an everyday or other day meeting schedule, as some people have told me they would like to have. Now, columns F5 to K214 contain highly encouraged but optional lesson names. This name helps refer to the same lesson across multiple days and groups. In principle, this should make it easier for students and the teacher to reference a lesson, regardless of cohort. For groups 1 and 2, I chose a convention of whole numbers for in-school lessons, followed by decimals for remote lessons. So the sequence goes, Lesson 1 is a live class, 1.1 is a remote class, 1.2 is a remote class, 2 is live, 2.1 is remote, and then you start over again, 3 is live, etc. You could name the lessons however you like, but I believe naming lessons systematically has many advantages. I will be including this naming convention in every daily agenda, every team meeting/thread, every assignment, and every Microsoft form or quiz. Let's take these one at a time. The agenda. Students want to go to the same place every day to find out quickly what is required of them. As the teacher, I want to provide this information with as few steps as possible in my workflow. Every moment I spend searching or copying or uploading or updating some calendar is a moment I could have been spending planning or providing feedback. A secondary teacher is likely to have 1 to 5 courses divided into perhaps 10 to 15 group period cohorts. As such, every step in your workflow has the potential to multiply exponentially it is incredibly important to think through your workflow carefully before implementing your system. The more you can pin down ahead of time, the better. After much consideration, I will be using a simple Word document to store a running list of daily agendas. Each lesson will be a single page of this document. I will write one entry per course per lesson. I will not be writing or updating separate lessons for each group period cohort. All cohorts will go to the same place for instructions. If there are cohort-specific instructions or assignments, I will indicate that in the agenda. There are no extra steps. Simply edit the document in place. If desirable, you can take the single extra daily step of uploading the document to your public-facing website. For ease of use, I will add a tab at the top of the general channel just for this Word document. This document will ultimately live in the class materials folder of the files area on the general channel. Remember, any files in this folder are automatically read-only for students. Preparing the agenda for the next lesson is as simple as copying and pasting the previous agenda and editing as needed. I plan on keeping daily agendas in reverse chronological order, so the most recent agenda is always the first thing that appears when the file loads. I do like inserting a page break between each day, but it's not necessary. I did consider my first love OneNote, but I've accepted that a large number of students will consume class on a phone, and the OneNote phone experience is exceptionally slow and unreliable, making it not a good source for the agenda. I considered adding a wiki tab to Teams, which would be perfect, except that any student could delete the entire wiki at any moment. Ultimately, I'm going with a Word document approach because, one, it's extremely easy to work with as the teacher. Word is a native tongue of the modern-day teacher. I can edit it directly in Teams without having to go in and out of programs or files. It can be easily emailed or printed for an interested party. It works better on phones than other options. It can easily live outside of Teams for archival purposes. I can easily share the file as read-only live with colleagues. For example, other teachers of my course can see what is happening in my classes. I can also give a co-teacher write access. They would always have the most up-to-date information. I could envision a PLC group planning this way, which I should take a moment to mention that this group period approach could be extended beyond one teacher to a teacher group period approach. Individual teachers might need to create a separate Microsoft team for grading purposes, but the burden of planning and creating materials could be shared, and assignments could easily be copied from one teacher to another. Feel free to use me as a sounding board if this is something that you are considering. Team meeting /thread. I will be scheduling a team meeting for every single remote lesson in every cohort's channel, or about 5 meetings per day. Granted, I could schedule a meeting to more than one team, but I want them specific to the group period cohorts. My expectation is that every student joins the meeting at the beginning of the period, like the in-school expectation of arriving to class on time. They are also expected to remain in that meeting during the scheduled class. This also allows teams to log in the background exactly when and for how long each student attends class. To increase engagement, I will frequently, in the agenda, specify prompts for students to respond to in the thread associated with the meeting, so on their group cohort channel. I also might ask students to exchange ideas. Students will have the option to turn on their microphones to carry on a group conversation as they work through any assignments for the day. They can share pictures or even videos of themselves or their screen to the extent they're comfortable. I envision having the class make a collaborative response to questions that I pose, that I can then quickly provide a response to the group asynchronously during my planning period. Other than possibly Wednesdays, I will not be a live participant in these meetings as I will be teaching the other group at that time. However, I will asynchronously respond to student questions and comments. I will also use this feedback to tweak the next lesson, whether in person or remote. Both students and myself will be able to reply to a comment with a meeting. I know, it seems unintuitive to start a meeting within the chat of a meeting, but that can be recorded. Effectively, it's an asynchronous video reply option. There are no extra steps. The video is automatically viewable in the thread and on streams only to team members. No need to go upload a video anywhere or go change who can view it. If you're on the team, you can view it. Insights. It's probably more appropriate for another video, but I did want to mention that Teams is adding an attendance report built right into the meeting for teachers. It's not quite available yet, though I've seen it online. You can already see a similar report by adding an app called Insights. If you look in the lower left-hand corner of the desktop client, you'll see the ability to add apps. Insights lets you see many aspects of a student's digital footprint in your team. For example, you can quickly see a tally of how many comments each student made in a channel on a given day. That's a metric I'm likely to sometimes use as a daily assignment grade. Meetings. Unlike the agenda, I will schedule a separate meeting for each cohort. It's important to name the meetings. I strongly recommend using a naming convention. All of my meetings will start off with the name of the lesson, the group, the period, and include the date. Students will get used to going to the agenda, then going to the meeting in their cohort's channel. For example, 1.1 would be lesson 1.1, G2, group 2, P6, period 6, and then the date, and maybe I call it something like welcome back. It should be unnecessary, but if you want to go the extra mile, you can add a hyperlink to the meeting directly in the agenda, or paste the agenda into the description of the meeting. If you mouse over the thread for the meeting, click the 3 dots and copy the link. Many items in Teams can be hyperlinked this way. Particularly on assignments that stretch beyond one period, I want students to collaborate across cohorts in the general channel and help one another. Back to student conferences. A common question that comes up is how to have a private conversation with a student or group of students. Some teachers have been using private channels, but Microsoft caps a team at 30 private channels, and I think 30 channels becomes quickly cumbersome anyway. My recommendation is to have a student conference channel where you schedule meetings intended for conferencing, but use the lobby feature. After scheduling the meeting, it can't be done at the time of scheduling, unfortunately. It's an extra step. Be sure to edit the meeting. Click the 3 dots, then edit the meeting details. Select Only Me can bypass the lobby. Now you'll be able to control who is in the meeting. This will give you a private line of communication, though any text comments you or the students make in the chat will persist. You could delete them, but you should just be aware. I would schedule the meetings by day or by purpose and use some sort of spreadsheet or other means to keep track of who should be at the meeting when. Assignments. Similar to meetings, I plan on using the same naming convention. To reduce my workload and the number of items that show in the gradebook, I will usually assign an assignment to the entire course, that is every group, period, cohort. I will specify the real deadline for each cohort in the agenda. You could also give assignments to specific cohorts. It's just more assignments in the gradebook, and I'm trying to avoid that. If an assignment is for a specific group, you could change the naming convention slightly and have, say, 1.1 G1 for group 1 and then the date. Or if it's a specific group period cohort, 1.1 G1-P2, etc. If you prefer, you can copy assignments. So once you make one, you can copy it to the other cohorts. I will be doing my grading directly in Microsoft Teams. Infinite Campus has partnered with Microsoft Teams, and here's a link, though I've not seen that integration in action, nor do I know if our specific school system is set up to take advantage, especially given that each traditional section is going to have different meeting days. One downside of having multiple groups and periods in one Microsoft team is that the gradebook includes all students. Transferring grades from Teams to a grading program like Infinite Campus can be tedious, though Teams does let you download the gradebook as an Excel file. To help with that, I've written a special spreadsheet with VBA code that I think will help. You paste the downloaded gradebook into this file, And a new file will automatically be produced, sort of magically through VBA, that has a traditional gradebook you can now filter for group and period. So if you do have to type the grades in another system, at least all the rows between your team's data and, say, Infinite Campus will line up. You won't waste time looking up and down the page for student names. I'll make a video for this. It's actually a pretty neat little program. Additionally, there's a worksheet that lets you filter for group, period, assignment, score, and more. Like I said, I anticipate making a video to go through this much more slowly. You can already download the file at www.mrhosey.com/gradebook. Please comment below if you would like me to make a tutorial and if you have any specific questions on that or really anything else. Now, as far as types of assignments, for now, like I said, I'm planning on entering all of my grades through the team's gradebook. Keeping the cycle of student work and feedback in one system is ideal, but it may or may not always be practical. I'm trying to keep an open mind. I plan on having at least 3 broad types of assignments. Classwork, for the remote learning days, homework, which is kind of what it sounds like, and formal assessment. Last spring taught me that I cannot possibly track down every missing assignment in a remote setting. There just isn't enough time in the universe. But I also believe that not all assignments are of equal value. I believe firmly that we as teachers must not let classwork mushroom into burdensome homework for students or teachers. Student work and feedback is an integral part of the learning process, and we have a duty to provide some level of feedback. So how do we balance these two diametrically opposed forces? For classwork, it will be posted in the agenda each remote day. Students will engage with the material in some way during the scheduled period, and they will have some task to be completed during that meeting. That will be recorded in Microsoft Teams gradebook. I think there needs to be some sort of explicit or implicit deal that I, the teacher, promise to keep the daily task meaningful and comfortably doable during the scheduled class time. In return, students need to promise to take the assignment seriously. They need to make a sincere attempt and make an active effort to exchange ideas with classmates. Individually and collaboratively, they need to leave feedback in the chat for that day's meeting. Crashing is okay, but crash thoughtfully and with group discussion. I promise to read the transcript and reconstruct the accident as best I can. I will leave small group feedback in the form of replies in chat and occasionally videos in the chat and/or commentary during our next live class. What about evidence of the classwork? Evidence of the classwork that shows up as a number in the team's gradebook may take the form of, it could be a simple score, an assignment with no document where I look at the chat and I could simply count, or I might include quality. I might use the rubric feature, but come up with a score for each student, something very simple. It could be a score from an external source, such as Castle Learning or some other thing that the teacher then has to manually enter a grade. I do think Teams shines when students have to upload a file, whether that be a picture or a Word file. You could have an assignment where I've already put the Word file there and students respond right in it. But the Teams gradebook and assignment feature lets me pretty easily go through those assignments, use a rubric if I want, give a score, and provide typed feedback. So I'm actually very pleased with the way that works. You can use a Microsoft form, although that doesn't get a number in the gradebook. If you want a number in it, you want to call it a quiz, and I use quiz in quotation marks. Quizzes can be assigned points. It is worth noting that to reduce the amount of time spent on scoring each non-multiple choice question, you might consider making all the questions actually worth 0 points, and then just the last question, however many points you want it to be out of. This way you can just enter one number. That's kind of if you're using it as more of an informal thing. You could use a OneNote page that you've distributed through Class Notebook to the team that you then look at and then manually enter a grade, although my experience has been that students often use the phones and it just doesn't work as well as I want it to. I find that students have more success with the Word files in the assignment feature through Teams. Homework. Homework would be assigned through Teams, but is expected to require time outside of the class period, hence homework. In my class, this is likely to take the form of a modest problem set or a written lab report. Could be more substantial written response to a question. Unlike classwork, I am looking for much more than simple participation. I also want to make a concerted effort to give individualized and specific feedback to students. This feedback will be given primarily through the feedback feature in the gradebook. It is my hope that students will interact with one another and myself asynchronously through discussion on the general channel during the week as they work through a homework assignment. Finally, formal assessment. I haven't quite worked out what I want formal assessment to look like, but I do know I don't want to chew up a bunch of precious in-school contact time with traditional paper quizzes and tests. Students want their teacher to engage with them, not to watch them take a test. I may need to shift away from problems and towards some timed online quizzes, the structure of which would be more open-ended than I'm usually comfortable with. That said, I do want to have a couple traditional in-person tests per quarter. Some formal assessment could be a project or a research paper. I don't have all the answers, but I hope that this has offered you some sort of insight that might be useful